Hey y'all, Matt Temple here. I'm so glad to have a few minutes just to share with you some thoughts on the question of what leads you to think that this new space will be meaningful to the new faces that you're trying to reach. We've said it over and over again, the world that we're doing ministry in today is vastly different than even 5 or 10 years ago. And we're sort of entering into this post-colonial era where in this season and in this time, the church has a responsibility and an obligation really to make sure that we're taking time to listen to our context. Or as one of my favorite missiologists, Leslie Newbigin, says, we must imagine afresh what it means to do ministry, not from a position of strength, but rather from a position of weakness. I found that too often the church is answering questions that nobody's asking, and it's so important in our context to take some time to listen and to really hear what it is that people are saying. So when you're designing your new space, you have to take time to listen to your context. Now in the anthropology, they talk about 3 primary strategies for seeking to listen and understand the context that you're moving in, that you're living in, that you're wanting to be in relationship with. The first one is indirect non-participant. This would be mostly data-driven, things like mission insight, glue, census data, anything that you can use to start to get a sort of macro sense of what's going on in my neighborhood, in my context, what do people do, how much money they make, socioeconomic, how diverse is my neighborhood, what do people care about, and sort of get a general sense of what's going on and listen to that sense. The second way is non-participant direct, and this is sort of like ethnography. So you might imagine sitting in a coffee shop at the same time for the next 10 days and just watching people go by, and what are the rhythms of people's life? Are they walking? Are they riding their bikes? Are they driving? Do they seem to be in a hurry? Do they seem relaxed? Are they walking with others? Are they in relationship? Are they by themselves? Do they have their cell phone on or earbuds in? Things like that, to just begin to just watch people interact in a space. See who they are. What do you notice? Be curious about the place that you're thinking about doing ministry in. Be curious about the people and what it is that they need, or what it is that they're thirsty for, what it is that they long for in their life, or what matters to them, what's important to them. And then the final one that anthropology talks about is direct participant observation. This is where you just go and get involved. Find an organization, find a class, find a group of people they're meeting in a park or doing dance classes or whatever it might be, and go participate with them. Go be a part of what's happening. In our church planter training, we call these mosaics, these spaces where people are already gathering, they're already connecting with one another. How can you go be present in those spaces and participate with them, and then be curious as you're doing it about what are you learning about people? What are you learning about your context? What are you learning about the people engaged in these different things? And so those are some strategies you can use for listening to your context. So just a little bit about me, for those of you who I haven't met, I live in Chicago. My family and I moved to Chicago in the middle of the pandemic, actually last late May, early June. We came here to pastor a church, a church that a friend of mine had planted a few years back. And so when we got here, obviously we haven't been in person with our church, and I'm wrestling through how do I meet new people, how do I make connections, what's happening in our neighborhood that matters to people. And so I did some mission insight data polls to just sort of see what's going on in my neighborhood. It was hard to do indirect or it's hard to do direct non-participant because there just weren't people out. Everyone was quarantining, so you couldn't really go sit in a coffee shop and watch people go by. And so I started to join some different Facebook groups and just see what people were talking about and what people cared about. And I did some of my direct non-participant observation through that. And from that, I stumbled upon a group of people in our neighborhood who were doing some community organizing. After taking some time to just watch their page and see what things they were talking about, I decided to join this group. And I started attending their Zoom meetings. I started participating online in some of the conversations that were happening. And as you know, last summer, in addition to being in the middle of a pandemic, we were also experiencing a lot of racial upheaval from the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all of those things that were going on in the summer that were rallying groups like this one that I had joined around racial justice and the conversation for racial justice. So I brought into this two fundamental questions for me. Number one, how do I engage folks in gospel conversations when we're not allowed to meet in person? Like, how do I even have these sorts of conversations with people and meet new people? And number two, what really matters to them? What do they really care about right now? From my time doing some of my research and listening, one of the things that I discovered is that obviously this organizing group that I was a part of that had about 350 members that all live in our neighborhood. One of the things that they were really doing a lot of conversation around was racial justice, but they were also realizing they had quite a growing edge. In other words, they were passionate about racial justice, but they also realized that there was a lot of room for growth and conversation around racial justice issues, that this was something that mattered to them. And at the same time, HBO was getting ready to release this show called Lovecraft Country, which is sort of a sci-fi TV series that really focused on using sci-fi to talk about racial injustice and the reality of racism in our country. And so I basically just sent out a message to this group and I said, hey y'all, I'm wanting to start a group that watches Lovecraft Country together, one episode a week, and just have conversations about racial justice, white supremacy, and all the things that we're dealing with in our country and in ourselves right now. If anyone would like to be a part, I'm going to do it on Zoom. We'll watch the show together over Zoom. I'll just share my screen. And after the show, we'll spend an hour just having some conversations, and I'll put some questions together each episode to sort of be a springboard into that conversation. And so we had about 14 people sign up, and so we spent about 10 weeks going through episode by episode with a new group of folks talking about something we cared about. And it gave me an opportunity to meet some new people. It gave us opportunity to talk about these issues that mattered to folks, and for me to frame it through a gospel lens, as most of these folks were not Christian and didn't come from a Christian background, and created a new space, a new online space for folks to talk about something that matters to them. So when you're doing your new space, one of the things you want to think about, and that's what this question that you're about to answer is all about, is listening to your context. What is it that people in your context are thirsty for? And how can you then bring the gospel into that conversation and create a space for a gospel-centered dialogue around things that matter to folks? So listen to your context. It's so important. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to share with y'all.